Let's get going. So what we were looking at yesterday is when the malva, when the creditor loses his promissory note, but the debtor still wants to pay it back. He knows he has to pay it back, so he's entitled to get a shovar. He's entitled to get a receipt, because without that receipt, you wouldn't want it to get paid back. You have to be very careful, however, that when you purchase a promissory note, you have to make sure that the note that you purchase hasn't been paid back yet. That's a cautionary tale to someone who would want to engage in purchasing a what's that? Purchasing what? Debt, right? When you want to purchase debt, exactly, right? I don't remember if we saw all of the Imrei Yaakov over here. Let me just take a look at. Whoops. Okay. So we're on this page. So aval im ein kasuv bo shem hamalva klal v'nischayev halo v'lechol mi shemotzi shtarchov zeh kamo shenogim achshav. Said like there's a prevalent minhag in his time that people would purchase debt, and therefore if I have a note against Shimon, I can sell it to whomever I want. Ein shover bechasimas yad hamalva moil alav im yotzienu acher. V'yomer kanise mehamalva v'lo yadati shenifra. Ma she'en kein shover be'edim lo yuchalitan lo yadati ki ha'edim motzin kol. He says, if you have just a promissory note that has the signature of the creditor saying that it was paid in full, so then that's not sufficient when it's for a promissory note that doesn't have the name of the creditor on it. If it just has the ability for anyone to use that shtarchov to collect on it, that note to collect, the problem is that if it only has the signature of the creditor, in other words, don't buy a promissory note that only has the signature of the creditor but doesn't have witnesses on it. That's what we saw yesterday. Because if you do that, you run the risk that the debt was paid, the creditor was paid in full, lost the note or claimed he lost the note, and then wrote a shofar with his chasimas yada, with his signature alone, and nobody knew about it. If it's with witnesses, so then you know that if a shofar had been written, it would have been done with witnesses, and then you can do your due diligence and you can track it down. That's the difference between having a note signed just by the parties of interest versus having a note signed by witnesses. That was the point that we were making yesterday. Okay. I hope that was clear. So here the Imrei Yaakov clarifies, L'chol mi shemotzi shtarchov zeh kamo shenogim achshav. Hainu shtarchov shekorin mamarna. Everyone remember the mamarna promissory note? So someone want to explain what a mamarna promissory note was? It basically was a very small piece of paper, and it was written on both sides. And it basically said, so the bearer of this note has rights of collection from Shimon of X amount of dollars or X amount of rubles. And then on the other side, it would have the amount with the signature of the debtor as well. Right, and you have to match the line on both sides, right? So remember, we did our research, and we discovered that this is a post-Talmudic method of preventing forgery from taking place, which was done in the Middle Ages, and a lot of poskim discuss it, but it's not a very well-known thing. In other words, unless you go through these halachos either in Even HaEzer or in Choshen Mishpat, you're not going to find it very easily. But that was the type of promissory note that they were using and it didn't have the name of the creditor. It just had the bearer of this note is entitled to collect X number of dollars from Shimon. It was basically creating almost like a check. Since it had written on it that anyone who bears this can collect this amount, so it's as if the debtor, or I think maybe what he's saying is that, the debtor becomes indebted to him, and he sort of relinquishes, he sort of causes his own situation by signing such a mamarna, because he knows that anyone who can get a hold of this will be able to collect it from him. Va'od dechayiv al kol panim lahachzir hamos shenasan hakona mipnei takona sashuk kamo beloka chayfetz v'nimtza shuhu ganuv. Now, if a person were to find this, find such a shtar chov, it's really the right of anyone who takes possession of the shtar chov to be able to collect on it. Just I'm having trouble controlling my cursor. Right, here it is. Okay, so what we were talking about in the halacha is a situation here. Sure. Ein shover bechasimas yad hamalva moel alav im yotzienu acher v'yomar kanise me hamalva. He says a receipt, even if the debtor can demonstrate that he has a receipt, that receipt will not help the debtor absolve himself from the obligation to pay this back, right? Because the purchaser of the note can always say that I purchased this note. When you write a mamarna, you're basically saying that this piece of paper has the power of collection from anyone who bears the note. And you're prepared to do that because you know that people might use this note and sell it as a financial instrument. And based on that, when the malva comes back to you and says, I can't find the mamarna promissory note that we wrote together, but I want to, so if you want to pay me back and I'll write you a shover. So what the Rav Shulchan Aruch is saying is, you better make sure as the debtor, when you pay back your debt, that you receive back a note with Adim written on it, such that if anyone were to come to you afterwards with the attempt to try and collect on that note a second time, you can show him, here's my shover with Adim. The guy also can't say, well, I didn't know and I purchased the note. He says, why? Because since the shover was written with Adim have a call. The fact that Adim were involved in the signing of this receipt means that there must be some way of tracking down. You going into shul and clopping on the beam and asking if anyone knows about this note, and people would eventually come forward. So that's the reason why he basically explains like this. It really is the obligation of the debtor when he pays back the loan. If he's not going to get the original note, that mamarna note, he better make sure that he gets a shover with witnesses' signatures on it, because the ihu da'afsid anafshe, because otherwise he's causing his own financial loss. Va'od dechayiv al kol panim lahachzir hamos shenasan hakona mipnei takona sashuk. And furthermore, if a person were to purchase that note, even if, let's say, Ruvain lent me the money, I, Shimon, paid back Ruvain the money, but not knowing that afterwards, Ruvain went ahead and sold the note to Levi. Levi then comes to me for collection. I am obligated to pay Levi the debt, and I can't claim I already paid it back. Why? So it's called Mipnei Takonas Hashuk. Because Takonas Hashuk essentially means that even if though it's not fair, because I'm being forced to pay back the debt a second time when I'm not obligated to, but it's not fair to Levi. And Levi is playing by the rules of the market. He purchased a mamarna, which is a financial instrument, legitimately. And I have to therefore make good in order to support the commercial convention that is part of my society. I'm sure you must have that concept in commercial efficacy. Yeah, that's the term. Right. So therefore, even though I'm the one getting ripped off because Ruvain really ripped me off, nonetheless, I can't claim I'm being ripped off at the expense of the guy who also played by the rules of the social conventions.
So, unless you take steps like this, then you can get transferred and enforced.
Right. So we have a similar example of that. If I buy an item completely innocently, and then I discover it was stolen, right? I was innocently walking down the street one day, and a guy had the back of his truck open, and he told me that he was a representative of Walmart, right? And and I figured, well, why not? Walmart's everywhere. So I bought the stereo from him. Well, people don't buy stereos anymore. Right. That's right. So he says, "V'davar zen niskan al pi manhige aratzos ugaone olam shekavu minhag zem mishum takanas hashuk." He says that it's true. The Ganav should be the one who should have to pay if I end up purchasing stolen goods, and then the victim of the theft comes to base and says, "That's mine." I have to surrender it. I have to surrender the stolen item. What about the fact that I'm going to be out of a few $100 because I paid the Ganav? So Chazal said there's something called takanas hashuk, that you have to abide by social convention, even though you end up getting stiffed for it. And social convention demands that anyone who's a victim of theft is entitled to receive their stolen property back, right? Even though you could argue, well, I paid for it. Yeah, but you just paid the ganaf, you didn't pay the owner. Because of Bishut Minchas Yitzchak, the Chekim Shabizmanenu, Af im Nichtav B'Chek Shem Hamalva. That what about checks in the modern world? Now, this is checks in the 20th century. People have stopped using checks. I understand that certain financial institutions are not even going to be issuing checks anymore in the next few years. Life is changing very, very rapidly. But let's talk about checks that we all grew up with and that we're all familiar with and that sometimes we still write. Okay? More and more I find myself almost never using checks. I think the last time I used a check was to send to Darchei Torah my post-dated checks for my kids' tuition. Otherwise, I never write a check anymore. Never. I go to a vendor and I say, okay, I'll give you an e-transfer, right? But checks in the modern world, af im nichtav b'check shem hamalve, even though the name of the creditor is written on the check. What does that mean? Dahainu shehilva bal hachek shahaloiva bal hachek kosav b'shur shenitfas shem shalmu lefikudat et shem hamalve. He says, pay to the order of, right? So who's the recipient, the payee of the check? You fill in the name. Mikol makom havi kamo shenichtav b'mamarna hana l'chol mi yotzienu va'adif minei. However, such a check can be signed over to somebody else. So even though it says this check is payable to Ruvain can sign the back of the check, endorse the check, and then give it over to Levi, And now Levi can cash the check in the bank. And where does the money get taken out of? It gets taken from Shimon's bank account. So it's like a mamarna, like we've been talking about. So Kaven da alpi hachok in the kabel hachek kosev shemo me'ever lachek yachola mosro la'acher v'chein hala. He says once you endorse the back of the check becomes a financial instrument that can be used by anyone who has the endorsed check to collect it. The ika bazeh dina de malchusa, and this is the law of the land. Lachein bal hachek chayav lifroa hamaot lechol mi shemotzienu. Whenever you write a check, be prepared to relinquish that money from your bank account to any person who bears that check, even if it's not the guy that you wrote the check to. It's basically writing a promissory note and committing yourself like the mamarna, where the payee is not necessarily the person who you originally gave it to. The ein lo shum zuchut l'ta'ana, and you have no right to claim afterwards. But I already gave Ruvain what I owed him. I paid him cash, and he told me he would tear up the check. You know what? Too bad. Too bad. In other words, if you were gullible and you trusted Ruvain without asking to get the check back, it's ihu da'afsid anafshe. You lost it. You caused your own loss. Ve'ein lo shum zchut l'ta'ana. Kagon shenatan et hachek rak avor schora shaya tzarech lekabel ulebasof lo kibelo. Maybe Shimon makes the claim, I wrote the check for merchandise that I promised that we negotiated that I was going to pay for. And in the end, I ended up not buying it. So he had the check, but I told him, forget it, I'm not buying it. And he told me, okay, I'll tear up the check. And I never got the merchandise. Too bad. He therefore does not want to honor the check. Okay, so this is the Minchas Yitzchak. He says that's not a valid claim. You can't say that. Once you've written a check, you've surrendered that money from your bank account. Okay, and you can't say, oh, I didn't. I only meant it as a safety measure or an insurance policy to help me get in with this particular vendor. Right. Right. That's before they pull the money out of your account. If you call the bank and say, I need to cancel a check, that's also part of Dina de Malchusa. That's the convention. There is a social convention that you do have a chance to cancel the check. Yes, you could. Yeah. But that'll land you in court. Let's say you end up paying for goods with a check and then you cancel the check. So then you're the ganav, right? Right. That's right. Or your bank account has insufficient funds, right? Bouncing. We all know about bounced checks. Okay, but that's only when the check is just written without any conditions. Or lanifra bilvad. He says, but let's say you write explicitly on the check, which you can do. I know in the States you can do it, in Canada too. You say lo sachir, that it is not transferable, or to the payee alone. Is there a specific text you write on a check? I've never done this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Umachak milat lifkudat, and you erase the word to the lifkudat for payment. Ve'asa shnei kavim shemora al hanal, and you make 2 lines. I'm not sure what he's describing. Apparently, there's some convention that they do in Israel also to sort of indicate this. So then it's like a promissory note that is non-transferable, and it's only usable by the creditor alone, by that particular creditor, for Ruvain. Ve'ein lo tokef hanal, and it doesn't have any of the strength of what we've been talking about. V'hine das hashach Simin Kuf Tzadi Sifkatan Aleph, Da'af Shekarka Nikna Bekesef. He says, even though we know, the Gemara says you can purchase karka either with kesef or shtar. Kol makom im kana b'shtar chov sheyesh lo al acherim lo kana. He says, if, however, a person were to try to purchase real estate with a promissory note that was not that I have, let's say I have a promissory note that Shimon owes me money. And so I take that, or like a check, and I take that check and I say, I'm going to transfer it over to you to purchase your house. That, the Shach says, is not a valid method of purchase. Even though this check or this mamarna does have the power of cash, it is a legal financial instrument, but for purchasing real estate, you can't use it. Now, why would that be? The lo sam chadaito, the shemeyim chol hashtar chov. The answer is that what were to happen if I have a promissory note that's made out to me and it says Shimon owes Ruvain $100,000. So I, Ruvain, go ahead and I go to Levi, I say, I want to buy your house. Here's a down payment check. See this promissory note? You can use it to collect from Shimon $100,000. Let me use it to buy your property. So what could possibly go wrong in that situation? Well, first of all, the check is only as good as Shimon's credit. That's number one. Well, let's say we trust Shimon. We know that Shimon is good for the money. There's a second problem. If Reuven goes ahead in front of two witnesses and says, I hereby forgive the debt that Shimon owes me, then no matter who bears that promissory note, it's useless because the debt has been forgiven. So therefore, the seller will not mentally take the deal seriously, and therefore can always claim that this was not a serious deal. He only gave me this promissory note as a security, but there was no kinyan here. There was no exchange of property based on that promissory note. Aval b'mamarna de'eno yachol limchol kana. V'hu adin b'check de'havale k'mamarna v'adif minei. But that's only with a promissory note. But if it's a mamarna promissory note, or if it's a check, you could take a check, a third-party check, and use it to pay for real estate. That you could do, because that's not something that someone can easily just, you could cancel a check, but he says it's not so easy to do that. A promissory note, you cannot use to purchase property. That's what the Shach says. But Rav Stern points out that a mamarna kind of promissory note, you could use. And because of that, he feels that a check you could use to purchase even real estate. Okay. And so therefore, getting back to our din, if you end up, if a guy comes over to you with a mamarna kind of promissory note and demands payment, and tells you have to surrender the money because I purchased this note, you can't say, oh, but I already paid him. Well, where are the witnesses that you paid him? So if you produce a shovar that has chasimas edim, that has witnesses signed on it, so then you have a valid claim. But if you just produce a shovar, a receipt that only has the signature of the creditor, that's not enough. Because the guy could say, how was I supposed to know? He doesn't have to prove that he bought it. He doesn't have to prove that he bought the promissory note. The fact that he's the bearer of the note is in itself the proof that he's the legal owner of it. It's like, it's like cash. So he says, Hainu sheha'idim chasmu ala shover avalim rak paru bifnei edim lo mahani. He says the witnesses have to actually be signatories on the receipt itself. Even if they are just witnesses who witnessed the payback, that's not enough, because that doesn't have a kol. The kol is that not only did you gather witnesses, but you also gathered a scribe in order to make this official. Okay. Right.
So is that
Is that equivalent to having two witnesses?
I don't think so. See,
Even though you can categorically show that.
yeah, but the issue with the witnesses is not just for verification. But remember, the whole deal with witnesses is to create a coal, is to create a public spectacle such that any responsible party can do their due diligence and discover it, right? So how am I supposed to know that you can show me evidence that the money was transferred from your account into the creditor's account, but that was a private transaction. Yeah, right. Right. So maybe one way of doing it would be let's say in a modern world, you want to pay back the debt. So you do a bank transfer and then you also post it on your social media account that that debt is hereby paid in full to my creditor. Yeah, put it on Instagram. I don't know if that would work, but certainly today, in today's world, you could make a good argument. People are very nervous about, people of our age are very nervous about this whole, e-commerce, because, you're basically relying on machines to make sure that, no one really has real cash anymore today. I don't have any real cash assets. Everything's electronic. That's recorded in a computer, right? So it could cause a little nervousness, because what happens if the system crashes and the bank loses all record of the tens of thousands of dollars that I may have put in the bank? Where did it happen?
Here, a few months ago. You lay down for one day and the people were like, nothing.
Bitcoin is yeah. Is Bitcoin
No,
finished?
Bitcoin
No.
is still on. The other one, no, it's not.
No extra coins.
Right.
Because one of them went down computers.
NFTs, all of these different instruments that are now being used as currency. On the one hand, it makes you nervous, but on the other hand, it's less subject to these kinds of problems, because when you're dealing with actual paper, right, that represents cash, so then it could fall into the wrong hands. With these NFTs and these crypto things, it's less likely to fall into the wrong hands. Or, well, there could also be crypto theft, right? Oh, is that what happened?
Yeah, the contracts. Transaction.
I don't know. It's a whole new world. I'm ready to retire. I'm going to live off of it. I'm ready to retire. Okay, so Nun Aleph. Va'achshav nispashet haminhag. Shemi shenevad lo shtar chov kazeh. Ve'hachasim bo moda shechayev lo. He says, what do we do nowadays? If a person is a debtor and the creditor says, I lost the promissory note, but the debtor agrees that he owes him the money and he wants to pay it back. So the only problem is, he says, I'm not going to pay you back unless you can produce the promissory note. I don't want that promissory note floating around town. And I don't trust the fact that it's, if you can't find it, then we better find it if you want to get paid back. So what is the recourse? I also don't want to be beholden to you. I still want to make sure that you get paid back. I don't want to go up to Shemaim after 120 years and they're going to tell me you owe this guy money. So what's the solution in that situation? So Azay Yachrizu Bebeis HaKnesses. There's going to be a public announcement in Shul. That was the convention in the 18th century. That's what people did. They clapped on the bima and they made a public announcement that this promissory note was lost. The debtor is nonetheless paying back the debt. And therefore, this debt is considered to be paid in full and no one can use that instrument anymore to collect it. We'll have to hold it here. We want to remind you that next week, I am again out of town. I apologize. We will resume a week from Monday. Again, I apologize for taking off so much time in February. I have a conference in England this time. But anyway, have a great Shabbos and we'll see you in Yirtzeh Hashem a week from Monday. Take care.